I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, Israel's upcoming elections. As Israel is headed to yet another round of elections this coming March, all new players appear on the political battlefield. One of those players is the New Hope Party, headed by formerly longtime Likud member Gideon Saar, who now challenges Prime Minister Netanyahu for the highest office in the land. Saar has been able to gather considerable support in the short time since the party came to be in December 2020, and current polls predict the party will win 13 seats in the upcoming elections. To share with us her view of Israel's current status and her party's vision for Israel, I'm happy to have with us former member of Knesset, Sharren Haskel, who left the Likud party and joined Saar on this journey. A few words about Sharren before we begin. Sharren was born in Toronto, Canada. She made Aliyah to Israel with her family in 1985. She joined the Israel Defense Forces and served in Jerusalem in a combat unit during the Second Intifada. Haskel completed her studies and was trained as a veterinarian nurse in Australia, where she worked in an animal hospital and volunteered with organizations to save wild animals. She holds a BA in political science and international relations from the Open University. Her term in the 20th Knesset began in 2015, replacing former member of Knesset Dani Danon, following his appointment then as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. She was member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, the Internal Affairs and Environment Committee, and the Special Committee on Drug and Alcohol Abuse. She also chairs the lobby for medical cannabis. Sharren, welcome so much to JBS.
Thank you very much, Shahar. It's a pleasure to be here.
First, I have to ask you this. I'm sure many of our viewers wonder. Let's talk about you, the first ever combat soldier to become a Knesset member. So which was tougher, the army service or walking through the political corridors?
Well, as an 18-year-old during the time of the Second Intifada, I can say it was pretty tough. There weren't many women enlisted in combat position in 2002, so you really had to push through your elbows in and work extremely hard in order to reach high. But I'm really proud of it, and I do think that that's what helped me during my entire career, that almost everything I see as something that is possible, that I can reach. I've been trained well in the army, so anything else is easy, easier.
I want to dive into the issues of the day with you now. Many people perceive the upcoming elections as yes Netanyahu, no Netanyahu. So as far as you're concerned, what do you think are going to be the priorities for Israelis as they head to the polls in March? What are these elections really about?
So the first priority is definitely stability. We've had 2 years of turmoils. We had this is the fourth election that we're heading within 2 years. It has never been in the history of Israel. Government come and go, and people go, and there is so much distrust that is being created and is being built among the people in Israel. This instability is a major challenge, not just because Israeli civilians are uncertain in the future and what's going to happen, but you have to understand that long-term reforms are completely out the window. Investors that wants to come and invest in Israel don't know what's going to be the long-term policies. I'm not even speaking about internal policies, about law enforcement, about security here, which just changes like the wind. And I think that especially during times of epidemic, the people need to know there's stability. And so this is, I think, going to be one of the major challenges. We don't have a solution to the economic crisis. The government has put a lot of its personal and political choices and decisions ahead of the decision that needs to be made for the people and for the country. So definitely the first one, the major one, is stability, and Gideon Saar is the only one that can actually build a stable coalition. All the other parties were already, in the game of elections for 3 terms now. This is the 4th time, and were not successful in creating a stable future and a stable government. And so Gideon Saar is the only one that is capable of doing that. The second thing, and it is related, is unity. Today, the debate between the different communities in Israel is very toxic. Government, the representatives that are now leading Israel are not giving the right example for the people. We have forgotten how to hold discussions where we may not agree, obviously, on everything, but we have to respect each other, and we need the government to restore
The
the
sense of
unity. Yeah, the unity between the people. I mean, Israel has such a diverse community, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different religion. It's so fragile. And so unity is a major issue, and knowing how to have an open discussion even when we don't agree with each other. And the third one, which is a major one, is the economy, obviously. And the major focus on economy, when you see, we were at a point at almost 20% of unemployment. We have 100,000, it's like 800,000 unemployed. I know maybe in America it doesn't sound like a huge number, but here in Israel, when you have almost 9 million people, this is a huge number. And so our major challenge would be, and I think it is also a major issue in these elections, is how we are going to restore a stable economy, one that's going to continue to grow here in Israel, that will bring back hundreds of thousands of unemployed people back into business, people who were bankrupting, their business was bankrupt, how to assist them to stand back on their 2 feet. This is one of the major challenges.
Sharren, you touched upon the economic situation and COVID. So it seems that the vaccination of Israel, or as it's called, vaccination, has been a great success. That the country, according to the Bloomberg Index and other estimates, is going to be the first to recover from COVID. Isn't that a tremendous success of the Netanyahu-Gantz government? We've seen the Prime Minister taking a lot of credit for it. So is COVID in Israel going to be an issue of the past soon?
Well, obviously, the vaccine project has been great, and the health funds have done such a good job at getting as many people vaccinated, and for sure, it's the best long-term solution. But sadly, Israelis have spent more days in lockdown than any other country in the OECD. Our children had the least amount of school days. It pushed us back so far in the education system here in Israel that we had to bring, and that's what we're also running on, a major plan on restoring the education system and narrowing a gap of more than a year now for school children. And it took a serious toll. Sadly, a lot of this is because the government placed their personal interest above the people. And I hope that we will replace the government and show that the country comes first.
The Israel-US situation at the moment, we've seen a lot of discussion about President Biden calling or not calling the Prime Minister. I'm sure many of us have seen former Ambassador Danon's tweet, "Please call me, and here is the number." I want to ask you, what do you read into this phone call or Israel-US relations in the time of Joe Biden as president?
Well, it's very serious. It really shows the damage Netanyahu has done when it comes to Israel's relationship with our most important ally. Gideon Saar does not have these bad relationships with the Biden administrations, and he has pledged to rebuild the bipartisan relationship.
You, to your credit, I'll mention, and also for our viewers, you, Sharren, have a lot of experience in interacting with the US. You've been around the United States speaking with different communities. You've been part of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Knesset, so you know what you're talking about. And I'm wondering if this issue between the American administration and the Prime Minister, is it a personal issue or is it an issue of political positions? Because we know that Gideon Saar is unabashedly right. You know, some would say even to the right of Netanyahu. So in that case, even if Mr. Saar becomes the prime minister, he might face the same issues with the Biden administration, don't you think?
Well, I would say that some personal steps that were done have created a certain tear. And I'm not trying to put any kind of blame on either Bibi or American presidents. But fact is that there is a history there. And that history is not, it's not a good one. And so when Gideon Saar comes clean into his term as Prime Minister of Israel and start to build a fresh relationship with the new administration, obviously there won't be any bad blood, and we'll be able to restore that bipartisan relationship and friendship.
I think clean is a key word here, because I believe that looking at the New Hope list, it actually includes yourself and other leaders from the right, including former Consul General in New York, Danny Dayan,
Yeah.
Benny Begin, and others who are, you know, from the orthodox right wing of Israel as it used to be. And some of the criticism heard from New Hope towards Likud was that Likud is a party of cronies who just follow the prime minister. So I'm just wondering, a few words about politics and coalition building. How do you see New Hope forming a government? And what would you do if Gideon Saar indeed becomes prime minister? What would be the first policies you would enact in office? How do you see that rolling out?
So we can form a government with any party that is committed to Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. Netanyahu's only option to form a government is to include extreme voices from the far right, not just extreme, but racist voices who had called for extreme reforms in Israel. And you know what? If it's not them, then it's the other side, and even representative of the Islamic movement. I mean, the Islamic movement is a sister movement of the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas in Gaza. To understand the extent of how Bibi is sort of pointed with his back to the wall, that he actually need to create cooperation with those extreme parties. So I have no doubt that Gideon Saar will have the best chances to form a government and to stable the government. As of for initial policies, the first thing we will do is limit the prime minister to an 8 years term. It is extremely important today in the Israeli law. There is no limit. It can be 2 years, it can be 40 years. And so from understanding that the longer you are in power, you feel more comfortable with it, and you might do things that you won't do if you're sort of have a limit on your term. And we want to introduce a range of reforms to help rehabilitate Israel's education system. We have an emergency plan to balance our healthcare system that has not been managed properly. It does have a lot of budgets, but it needs to be managed properly. And obviously our economy in general, which has suffered so badly from neglect under this current government. So passing finally a budget, which is a basic thing. Israel didn't have a budget for the past 2 years. And during a pandemic, this is the first long-term economic plan that you
Sharren,
have.
just for the sake of our viewers who are not as familiar with the intricacies of Israeli politics, when you're saying Israel had no budget approved in the Knesset for the past couple of years, what does that mean? Because people look around and say, hey, Israel was, is a functioning country. It's paying its debts. What does it mean that Israel doesn't have a budget? How does it impact your work, and especially yours as a leading member of Knesset who's very active on various realms?
So that's the issue. Netanyahu had to pass a budget in the last few months, and he chose not to pass it during a pandemic, which is a serious matter, especially when we are facing an economic crisis. It means that the budget is divided by a certain scheme, like a certain way of calculating it, and it's being directed to the offices only on a minimal kind of budget, and then you can sort of go and play when you pass a legislation and when the Knesset approves it. But what it really means, it means that the education system, for example, is not giving the funds that it needs in order to function correctly.
No new money is coming in.
No new money, and basically it's just salaries for schools, but no new special education plans or things like that. Municipalities that needs to have specific fixing of sewage, of roads, of intersections, things like that. The budget doesn't come to them. There's major problems that are being created in almost every sector and every aspect of it, which is severe.
Severe. You mentioned the outreach by Netanyahu and Likud and this relationship with the United Arab List, Mansour Abbas, the Islamic movement. There is an issue in Israel currently that relates to a certain status of crime, not only within Israel in general, but also within the Arab sector in Israel, violence against women. We've all heard about the terrible rape of the 10-year-old in the south of Israel. Is it on the agenda of Gideon Saar, yourself, and New Hope to deal with those issues, with issues of crime in general and within Arab society? Has there been any outreach to the Arab sector by Saar's party, by you?
So one of our major reforms, obviously, we've got I would probably say 5 most important ones. One of them is to completely eradicate the violence and the crime within the Arab communities. Some communities, it's just been like the Wild West. There's no law, no order, no enforcement, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's been like that for years. Unfortunately, Netanyahu neglected these parts of our country. And what we see today is, crime organizations that are being subsidized that are dealing with illegal weapons, with drugs, that are committing crimes of, how do you call it, extortion.
Yep.
Yeah, starting from farmers up to construction sites and small businesses all around the country. You see violence inside their community, a lot of murders, a lot of violence against women. Women's are the one who are paying the biggest price, many of them in their lives. Because of that, we see illegal taking over of land. And all of that has happened under Netanyahu. And so our plan is a specific plan, very aligned and detailed about how to restore the law and order in the Arab society. It includes enforcement, real enforcement in those communities. It includes collecting all the illegal weapons. It includes to drawing up those crime organizations from their business as well. It's very detailed, and it's one of our major issues that we'll deal with once Gideon Saar will form the government.
I understand from you that New Hope is basically a clean slate for Israel, when you come into these elections offering something to the public. And I want to remind to our audience that if I'm not mistaken, it was Netanyahu himself who a few years back supported limiting the prime ministerial term to a two-term prime minister, similar to what's happening in the US. That's correct, right?
Yeah. He actually advocated for that, but unfortunately, with Netanyahu, he promises a lot of promises before the elections, but unfortunately, and this is one of the biggest disappointment that we had from him, is that he never promises to fulfill his promises.
Yeah, you know, people think about politics being only part of the big things. So just quickly enough, one of the things you enacted in the Knesset or brought forth was actually using emails with local municipalities, right?
Yeah. I mean, as startup nation, there is so much things within the government that are backwards. I think it's ridiculous that we had to have a legislation that will force government offices to use emails instead of faxes. But this is the kind of issues that we have to deal with. So we have also a very detailed plan on how to digitalize Israel and Israel's government and Israel's authorities, so that it will be easier and accessible to the Israeli public. The bureaucracy in Israel is crazy. Any ole or tourist who had arrived to Israel or visited Israel, live in Israel, understand how much crazy regulation and bureaucracy we have here. And this is one of our major reforms as well, is to completely cut down. We have put a digit to it as well, so we want to cut it down in 40%, all the bureaucracy and the regulations.
I had to say, so that people understand, it's really a great perk to have somebody as young as yourself as part of Israel's legislature. And a personal thank you, because I still remember when I'm calling the local municipality and I'm asking if it's possible to email them a form, and I get a stern answer saying, we don't do that, we only use fax.
So just now by the law to actually do that. So,
thank you. And before we conclude, we only have a couple of minutes left. I have to ask you, you grew up in Canada, you were in Australia for many years. You understand that Israel is somewhat of an issue when it comes to interaction with Jewish communities in the diaspora. So what would you do to bridge the gap between Israel and Jewish communities around the world? And from your vast experience, speaking all across the United States and meeting with Jewish communities.
So there's no doubt that we need to build some new bridges. We have not invested enough in the shared understanding between the Jewish communities in Israel and diaspora. Gideon Saar has said very clearly that the unity of a Jewish people is not just a value, it's a strategic asset. And so we must face, and as a community, all of us around the world, we must face together the threat of anti-Semitism. We also want to make sure that any Jew who wants to come here to Israel and make Aliyah will have a home here. We'll be working on a number of ways to assist Olim. But yeah, I think that we have to find some new bridges that we need to build between the communities. As the former chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the subcommittee of the Foreign Affairs and Security Committee here in Israel, and as someone who had been representing the Knesset in so many universities and communities, Jewish communities all around the world, I really understand the challenges. And a lot of the times also they're paying the prices when Israel's getting, into a sort of a high level situation, war, a conflict, anything like that. Immediately, the people who would feel it the most are our Jewish communities around the world. People will point the finger towards them, and so unity between us has to be strengthened. And yeah, there's many plans that we want to aspire to, and I hope that we will be the one that will form the next government in order to bring them.
Well, I want to say a big thank you to you, Sharren. You're definitely a fresh voice in Israeli politics, and you give us all hope that things will be done more, not only internally, but also focusing on this important connection between Israel and Jewish communities around the world.
It's very suitable. I can see the picture now behind you of the destruction of our temple, the holiest site for the Jewish tradition, the Jewish religion, and that firstly happened because of hatred, and because there wasn't any unity. There was a poisoned discourse between the communities. And we have to learn from that. We have to learn and remember that we can't let it happen again.
That is very perceptive and poignant from you, Sharren. That's exactly the reason why it's there. Thank you for your observation.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed, and I send my love to all the Jewish community around the world.
Well, it was fascinating to hear of your public work and hopes for change in Israel. And I look forward to having you again and again soon with us on JBS and beyond. And to our viewers, I want to say thank you all for watching. And to all, we say stay safe and stay healthy in these times. I'd like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golub, our technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to our wonderful producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. For JBS, I'm Shahar Azani. Until next time, shalom and lehitraot.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. And we're especially pleased to remind you that thanks to a generous matching gift from the Cayley family, every new or increased dollar you donate to JBS will be worth double to JBS. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.